some of the programs are poorly written, but many of them are fine. They're just being delivered so poorly, or they just are overly complicated. So it seems a base expectation in 2023 that we can have delivery of programs in an efficient and modern way. So just like to bring us back to that, and I personally think that that is a tool towards racial justice if everyone can receive equal treatment and again, plain English delivery of the programs we're all entitled to. So with that, I'd like to invite questions from the audience. And if you could just give your name and affiliation before you ask your question. Any questions from staffers, the media, advocates, or students?
Yes.
Yes, please. Please give your name and affiliation.
I want to have Nina. Nina, is that you on the end there?
No, Karla.
Karla.
Yeah, Karla, yes. Buying property from your heirs.
Yes.
There is a new law that you all haven't talked about that helps farmers and helps heirs to allocate property when heirs don't want to do it. And you all haven't talked about that. Would you comment on that 2020 law that assists heirs to gain their title to their property?
So my thought is that you're talking about the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. Absolutely. And so I learned about, this legislation, once again, through the Federation, and, just got some advisement from the attorney that I spoke with. And so what I'm doing is, through the whole family tree and genealogy process, I basically had to contact all of the living heirs that are still named on the deed, and just work through them. So everybody that's named on the deed that is still alive, we went through, spoke with them to make sure that they're amenable to this purchase that I'd like to make. If those folks on the deed are gone on to glory, then I had to go and find their children or their grandchildren or whoever is left in that line to, talk with them to make sure that they're okay with, what we would like to do with the land. Absolutely. But that legislation, did absolutely, make it not easier, but you have to go through the family first, right? Because in past times, if one of those heirs, called for a partition, boom, it was immediately on the courtroom steps, and it was first come, first serve. And they had to be, cash only. You're going to buy it, and you're going to buy it now, which most of our families could never accomplish. So, with the Partition Act, there is running it through the family first. The family gets first right of refusal, and then some other benefits as well. So, like I said, when I was speaking, we've secured the land through, our legal services. We now have legal advisement. I can go to my attorney, I can talk through these things. Our land is secured through the Uniform Partition Act so that the family is involved. And now this third piece is just that financial risk, that we've addressed in the room today. So absolutely, that Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act is key, and it was brought forth and written by an African-American attorney, Dr. Mitchell, who's, amazing, and that work is just, yeah, you can't even put a value on that work for me and families like me.
Talk a little bit about the voluntary act that you have the family to go to. You can volunteer to ask them to acquiesce to your desire.
Well, it's just that. If they're listed on the deed, then, they have interest in the entire plot of land. So you have to get their permission to move forward with a purchase. I have a branch of my family that wants to keep their 3 acres. They really don't understand yet how ownership works, in an heirs property state, but they want their 3 acres. So what I'm gonna have to do there is partition that piece off, which is a whole lot more expensive. It's a whole lot, it's another bump in the road. But we're going to partition their piece off, let them have their piece. I'm gonna be watching to make sure those taxes are paid, because I don't wanna have to come back this way. But we're going to go ahead and give them their piece, and then we're going to deal with the rest of the property as my great-grandfather would have liked.
Okay, how did you figure out that 3 pieces were not the piece that was in the middle?
Well, okay, and so that's the thing. When, you know, with that owner's interest, it's an undivided interest. You know, it's not as though you have a part of it. You really have just an interest, but in the entire lot. And I've yet to get my family to understand that, because through the years, because there's 30 acres split over across the 9 siblings, everybody thinks that they have 3 acres, but that's not the way it works. So, you know, once we get to that point, we'll have to have that conversation about, you know, you really don't have 3 acres here, but let's make it work for you. And we'll make it work one way or the other. There's some adjoining property there, so my thought is that I will prayerfully buy the big plot and then give them the adjoining 3 acres that's already kind of separated off from my grandmother. But yeah, it's a whole conversation that you have, you know, with your family, and that it's a part of that whole journey of tracing not only the land, but the history. And I've really had to bring my family back together from disparate places around this work that we're doing with the land. It's been difficult in some ways, but it's been really rewarding in other ways, like I said, because now they know their story, and at least we have a common sheet that we're working from.
Can I just add that she is not staff or a licensed attorney? This is an Advocacy Institute member of the Federation.
May I also direct?
Could I get one last question?
Yes, sure.
In the probate process, you probated, but when you probate, as you well know, it probate, but it doesn't tell you where on the land who owns what part of the land. And that's why that undivided property comes in.
Right.
And so, talk a little bit about your probate, how you had to go through probate to get where you are.
Well, actually, we're in the beginning processes of that right now. Like I said, you know, we had the entire, you know, family tree. I do a lot of work on ancestry and just pulling information. I've learned so much about property ownership, how land grants from the 16 and 1700s. You know, I know the first person that actually had our plot of land back from when the folks first came to Florida, when Florida first became a territory, all the way through. And so, you know, you have to, once you have your tree and you know all the folks that you got to work with, then it's the affidavit of heirs, right? I've got to substantiate before the court that I know who these owners are. Even if they're gone on, I know who their children and their grandchildren are. And then you submit that, and then, okay, well, these are the heirs. That's great. Everybody has to sign a joinder and a waiver saying, okay, you know, I'm giving you, Karla, the okay to go forward with this process with the court. And then from there, once you establish that, then you're at the point of quitclaim deeds if you've got people that just want to give it to you, or that's where the survey and the appraisal come in so that you have a value on your land, and then you can make your family an appropriate offer. So it's a whole journey.
Thank you so much. And I just have to say, if there's any folks in the room who are new to the heirs property issue, if you're an advocate for farmland, sustainable farming, and would like to catch up on this issue, we have a wonderful interview on our website, food.berkeley.edu, an interview with Ms. Dãnia Davy, explaining some of this, as well as an event last fall on the Justice for Black Farmers Act that has a testimony from farmers and videos and a bit more explainer. So it will be a great chance for those who are new to this issue to catch up, and we can all be on the same page about this. So it is complicated, so you've done an amazing amount of research, and yeah, just want to share that resource. Does somebody else, next question, please? Yes.
Yes, I'm going to shift away from Karla at this time. Shirley Blake again, graduate from Southern Working, and I'm going to, my question is for April, followed by David. Okay, April, you spoke of your work with Alcorn State University. I'm just wondering, are you all working with the local extension officers in various counties? Do you all, do
Is it on?
programs?
Does it work? I'm loud anyway, so I can't tell. So we do work with Alcorn's extension agents, but we also work with its extension agents at other 1890s as well, especially when we're sending out surveys and trying to gauge. For example, when we've been working on that Walmart project on access to credit, we are relying on the extension agents to assist us in getting those surveys out to the farmers because they are out there in the field all the time interacting with them and not in an office on a computer like us most of the time. So we do interact with those extension agents, especially at Alcorn since we are at Alcorn, and we are very reliant on them actually.
Okay, so the local, like different counties, you all work with those. I know Mississippi State you spoke of.
Yeah, so I don't think that we've worked very heavily with Mississippi State's extension agents. We do sometimes because they cover a different region of the state of Mississippi. So Alcorn's extension agents are mostly, I think that the furthest up they go, like don't even quote me, but they're in that Vicksburg, Natchez area where Mississippi State covers most of North Mississippi and into the Delta. Yes, but we also work with the community-based organizations as well throughout the state of Mississippi and throughout other states. Ms. Tillman is over there. We work with him all the time in Oklahoma. So we do get down on the local level. That's the only way that we're even able to interact with these farmers and ranchers, especially with the issues and the inequity in technology. So, yeah.
And David, okay, you spoke of at your chapter in 31 states. I'm just wondering, is Mississippi one of those, or there's not the?
I don't think we have a chapter.
One that you can reference.
Yeah, we have a few chapters in Georgia, and we hired about a couple of years ago now, a Southeast organizer who is trying to grow our coalition in the Southeast. So that's not a part of the country that we have a ton of chapters, but we are a growing network, and I do. Yeah, Olivia Cleveland. You can see her bio on our staff page. It's just olivia@youngfarmers.org is her email address, and she's wonderful. And yeah, so we have some chapter capacity there, but hopefully more in the future.
All right, thank you. And one last, I'm sorry, I had your name, I'm crossed up here on my paper.
Margaret.
Margaret. I call those stories just disheartening. Disheartening stories. It's just awful, but it's true. And as we have learned over these days past, we have to speak our truth. That's right. And it's just the truth. It's just reality. But I just don't understand. We're in this city. We're in setting at the Federation, and we often talk about things that goes on at the local offices. And it just said always we just keep repeating the same thing over and over. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. So hopefully this session will steer us towards better communication and this racial gap. Close this gap. And it's heartening to hear these stories and how we're just hindering certain group of people. But it's the truth. It's hard to hear, hard to intake, but it's the truth. And I thank all of you all for the information you shared.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Fred Miller. I work at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law School. And off of your point about the farmer stories that Margaret was talking about, one of the things I think Dãnia and I have been talking about is whether there's something to do with that subjectivity. And there's law, which the law sounds great, and then there's the subjectivity that is existing. And the laws are trying to deal with that subjectivity by creating rules that people have to abide by. But one of the things that Dãnia and I was talking about was whether people's performance evaluations could be subject to these kinds of decisions that they make and the misinformation that they give. And I wondered if you looked at that at all.
I would be very excited to see that as well. There are, I think there are some places where we're looking for Congress to make the change, and there are some places where we're looking for regulations to be officially changed or handbooks. And so a lot of our work lives there as well. To your point, we talked about delay as one of the primary tactics of discrimination or mistreatment. So I would love to see, loan officer performance evaluations include what we call time to funding. So a farmer came in, what is their time from their initial application to their decision for funding, and can we have that broken down by racial demographics? Because I think that would really illuminate where the problems are happening. Many people have been fighting the fight for a long time for receipt for service to be implemented more fully. There's a whole handbook on all of the instances in which FSA staff don't have to give a receipt for service. So that's an area I would love to look at more and see more transparency on, because a lot of the discrimination happens before there's an official record. And I think that's one of the problems that we're bumping up against when we're looking at discrimination payments too. It's just because it's not written down on a sheet of paper somewhere doesn't mean it didn't happen. So those would be my initial thoughts.
I'll just add, if I could just add to that answer, because I'm a former employee of USDA Civil Rights, and there is a refusal to track racial information because of the known consequence. It's not that many people are holding information, not sharing it. They're purposely not gathering it. So it's a dispute whether or not to gather it. And many, many, many people within the agency are adamant to not gather it on the local or state level because they know there are consequences attached. So, and then another issue is that civil rights is torn between grievance claims by employees and program complaints. And I would say that de facto, their emphasis is about 80% on employee claims and 20% on program. And when it comes to, and it's hard for them to culturally shift because the employee claims are all about, taking care of the employee. And then the program claims are about identifying and reprimanding the employee. So you see how to switch about face so quickly for an agency is quite hard to say, we care about the employee and want to help them versus the employee is the source of the problem. You see what I'm saying? So I think that's I noticed that working within the agency, what a difficulty it is. And of course, there are people purposely placed in positions of power that are anti-civil rights. So that is an issue too.
And can I just add that in terms of our existing civil rights litigation framework, the age discrimination claims that would be within EEOC have been really utilized by white men to preserve the existing structure that they have that would allow them to claim age-based discrimination as a basis for why they're being encouraged to leave as a part of a transition of culture. And I think that's something that we all pay attention to a lot because everyone up here is functioning at every level of advocacy. I just want to state that we are all working on the handbook piece to make sure that the customer service is affording benefits to folks instead of all the ways in which you can avoid affording loans to folks. At the same time, there's a body of litigation that is growing right now, and I think that's why we all have a shared sense of urgency, and our groups are really partnering very intensely around this upcoming farm bill, because that litigation that maybe 20 years ago would have been tossed out of courts as laughable is gaining traction, and that's a big part of it. I think that the age discrimination, there's a really strong body of civil rights claims that are predicated upon white men above the age of 65 maintaining their benefits despite whatever gender or racial discrimination they committed on the job, and that's another aspect of the concerns, and that's another reason why we try to make sure that we're addressing it on all of those levels, because you're absolutely right that really getting some case law to you know, and Nina and I talked about that yesterday, but getting some good case law that's supportive of the real civil rights concerns that this country has yet to address aren't lost in the mix of this emerging body of equal protection claims that are being brought.
And if I could just add one more footnote as well, another layer to this work is looking outside of the Farm Bill and looking at underlying statutes that govern like the GS system or the Senior Executive Service, and looking at those underlying values that are in that statutory language and thinking about what could change in order to come at this from that perspective too. Looking at all levels of the experience to make sure that we're thinking about, you know, what values do we want to be demonstrated through the execution of these programs, and what standards do we want to hold people to?
Question in the back.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sakina. I work at Berkeley Food Institute as the policy director. It is so good to have all of you here. And I think part of the work and preparation from this was so driven by the work of the Advocacy Institute at the Federation. I'm really curious to know if all the folks on the panel can talk about how do you prepare for policy engagement? What does the Advocacy Institute look like? What does grassroots engagement look like? How do you get people energized and prepared to engage in a Farm Bill year or non-Farm Bill years or for events like this, and encourage people when the halls of this building can look really intimidating? How do we dispel the myth around who gets to engage in policy and who doesn't? Because y'all do it so well, so please tell us about how you do it.
Well, I can speak to the Advocacy Institute. And so the Advocacy Institute that we started last year really comes from, you know, learning about how our organization has always worked. So we're rooted in the civil rights movement. And so because of that, our members they've already been primed on grassroots organizing, and because we are a cooperative and we function from that framework of democratic decision-making, one member, one vote, I think that we have a leg up on other organizations that are not structured in that same way, because there annually is engagement that's required of us to maintain our charters in the states that we're located in. And so I think that our members already bring that spirit of civil rights engagement and democratic decision-making to bear upon the things that the Federation staff do. And so my role was very easy. Like, it was really the members, it's really member driven. And so it's responding to the needs of the members. So the two tools that we use are that our state leadership help identify members that are really actively engaged within their body, within their states. And they put us in contact with members of cooperatives that are members of the state associations. And so that's how the Advocacy Institute members have been identified. And then we just organized the series of listening sessions as well as trainings on, you know, how to speak to an elected official, writing an op-ed, things along those lines, that just a little bit of technical skills development that folks need. And then the other tool that we use that's become really popular is just because I'm a nerd. I'm super into podcasts. And so in my job interview, I told my boss, I really want to have a Federation Conversation podcast. And so that's something that we've also been able to use. We've switched from like a pre-recorded to a live formatting where our members are able to engage right there on the spot in the Zoom. And that's been really, really helpful in keeping our members abreast of not just the Farm Bill, but all these different Inflation Reduction Act, and ARPA, and all of the other things that have just been pounding us back to back, one wave after another, but our folks are able to stay engaged because they want to be, and they're part of a cooperative because they want to be a part of solutions to the problems that plague their communities.
Come after you because
So I decided to go after Dãnia because we work a lot with the Federation, and I think that is how we kind of build on making sure people are informed. So we don't always work directly with people, but we go through organizations like the Federation and other community-based organizations to ensure that we are giving that information and that knowledge to farmers and ranchers. We also have our podcast, we have our newsletter, and that is not just to keep you updated, but to educate you and inform you on the process. When we used to do, when I first came on to the Policy Center, I started off with the virtual listening sessions with the farmers because we were in the middle of COVID-19. And I remember we were just talking about our research and about the recommendations that came from the research. And somebody said, "What is the Farm Bill?" Yeah, and so that is what inspired us to create that set of podcasts. And our second episode was, we had Rodney Brooks from the House Agriculture Committee, USDA detailee. He came on and he broke down what the Farm Bill is from title to the history of it and everything like that. And we recently did a session on that at a conference in Atlanta. He and I did that together on what is the Farm Bill, and we coupled that with an actual listening session on issues and challenges. So I think that for us at the Policy Center, it's just making sure that those that we serve, because we are national, we're not state-based, we're not regional-based, we're pretty much meant to be a voice for everyone across the nation. Having those tools to make sure people are educated and knowledgeable, and then going through people like Dãnia or even Fran over there to ensure that we're getting that information out is just very crucial to the engagement process and education process.
If I could just add really quickly, as a national coalition with membership like the Federation and RAFI USDA, we depend on this kind of local organizing and the bringing of these voices from these communities to DC. But and us as staff in DC can never be as strong an advocate as the farmers who come and speak their truth directly to policymakers. But what we can do is that we can continue that conversation in DC when y'all go back home. And I think the second piece is, from our position as a national network, which is majority white farmers, it's about building our power and bringing that work of solidarity from our farmers of color and building that power with farmers and white farmers across our constituencies, bringing together fishermen and livestock producers and vegetable farmers together to have one voice, because we can't get these policies across the finish line by ourselves. So that process of movement building is part of the role that we play at this national level.
Thank you. A few more, we can cram in a few more questions. Did you have one, Nikki?
I did, but if we have one more question, then I implore my...
Sure. Okay, yes. Right. No, I'm sorry, behind you. Oh. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
Hello, everyone. I'm Berkeley. I'm with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. I'm from Mississippi, and I think the question in the back and then the comments at the front really affirms a lot of the things that I've been thinking since I've been sitting here and throughout the summit. As a millennial, and I guess what would this be? I forgot the generation. I'm not a farmer, but I'm a really, really, really strong advocate. And I really believe in the work that we're doing. And even as educated, I get caught up in the semantics and the language of it all, especially in these policies. And specifically when it comes to land laws, I really think millennials, we're in a position to have stemmed the tide, because now we're inheriting that land, and it's up to us to kind of decide what happened next. And so what does that transition look like? And so when it comes to the Uniform Partition Act, thinking about that, we're in an echo chamber, so we kind of know what that language means. But there are so many other millennials who are like, what is that? Like, what does this mean? How does this affect me and my family and our land in southern rural areas? And so I would like to know, and also encourage, if there's any information or toolkits that are going out, how can we make that language more accessible? How can we just name what it is? If it's land theft, how can we help other millennials, other younger generations understand what is going on. And so if you have any recommendations, the Federation and Plaza Center does an amazing job of getting that information out. So I just want to know if there are any new ideas emerging or if there are best practices so that we can all be on the same page and raise awareness.
Since you specifically named Ayers property and you specifically named resources, CAPS, Friends Law School's program has worked on state-specific resources. And our partnership is really unique because they also sponsor the Federation Conversation and sponsor the attorneys who were able to participate in our Forward 2023 boot camp and distributing those resources which the Federation has on our websites. But also, you know, the report that National Family Farm Coalition, Jordan authored it, but National Family Farm Coalition worked in partnership with the Federation on the report about land theft. Because there are separate issues that need to be addressed, that folks need to be educated on. And I think that report and just the amplification that the organizations partner to do to make sure that, like Jordan said, their membership is primarily white, and they have a completely different social network outreach than we do. And so that type of partnership is a really big piece of what you're addressing, ensuring that conversation is happening not just amongst the folks that have heard it a million times, but also engaging others who are just completely unaware of those realities. And so I think that that's one of the things that, you know, we've done, Policy Center, we kind of try to link everything, but whenever we're out, I was telling Abby Fain from Intertribal Ag Council, when I'm out and Intertribal Ag isn't at the table, I always mention the work that we do to amplify each other's messages. And I think that's what it looks like. I think that's what this next generation is calling for. It's funny that I used to be a part of the next generation and now I'm not, but that's cool. But I think that you know, we walk so y'all can run. And so, you know, y'all are going to come up. I feel this is a big part of the fellows that we have at the Federation. I feel personally, I have my daughter, Imara, here, she's 9 years old. I feel personally that engagement of that next generation as early as possible. Y'all just have all these tickety things and all that stuff to really get folks interested and inspired. And so those resources exist. One thing I hope is that y'all's generation does not lose that there's been that legacy that you're standing on top of, but the new ideas and the imagination that you all bring to distribution of information, we learn from that. And so it's going to be for you all to help us make sure that message is carried into every room that you go.
Thank you so much. I wish we had so much more time, but we're going to have to wrap up. So please take your questions to your members of Congress. May our solidarity be unbroken. And I know that the Federation's members will be gathering where maybe in this quadrant of the room to plan the next strategy session. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it, and please stay in touch.